When the news all broke about this fallout between William and Harry, I didn't believe it because I witnessed how close they were. I didn't believe it. I remember being interviewed on it and said,
It is said that inside royal walls, nothing is ever truly spoken loudly, everything is suggested, implied, remembered in fragments, and according to former royal butler Grant Harrold, there were moments inside the royal household that left lasting impressions, moments that he later described in interviews as unusual, difficult to explain, and emotionally striking in hindsight, and what he said next sparked widespread discussion among royal watchers, because it was not about official events, but about behavior, atmosphere, and how certain members of the royal family were perceived behind closed doors. But what he described about Prince Andrew was not what most people expected to hear from inside the palace, according to Harrold's recollections. Prince Andrew at times gave off what he called a weird vibe, a feeling that could not easily be explained in formal language, something sensed rather than directly observed, and he also described what he called an entitled feeling, not as a confirmed fact, not as an accusation, but as a personal interpretation formed from his experience working in royal environments. And in those environments, everything matters, even the smallest gesture, because royal households operate on structure, hierarchy, and tradition, where acknowledgment itself is a form of communication. And one specific moment he described happened at a major royal event that many people remember very differently, during a royal wedding event involving King Charles and Queen Camilla. Harrold recalled that Prince Andrew reportedly did not interact with staff guests in the same way others did, instead focusing only on family members and close associates. And while that may sound minor from the outside, inside royal environments, staff interaction is part of the system that keeps everything functioning, and acknowledgement is often seen as basic courtesy. Harrold described the moment as sad, not angry, not dramatic, but disappointing, as if it highlighted a quiet separation between roles, between people inside the system. And if you're enjoying this kind of deep royal documentary storytelling, where we break down behind-the-scenes accounts like this, then subscribe now, because stories like this are just the beginning. But to understand why stories like this gain attention, you have to understand how royal perception works, because inside institutions like this, nothing exists in isolation, every moment becomes part of a larger narrative. And that narrative is shaped over years, sometimes decades. Prince Andrew has been one of the most widely discussed members of the royal family, not only because of his royal position, but also because of long-standing media scrutiny and widely reported associations that have been discussed globally. And once a public narrative forms, it begins to influence how every new detail is interpreted. And this is where the story becomes far more complicated than most people realize. Because perception inside royal environments is not just about what is seen, it is about how it is interpreted. One person sees confidence, another sees arrogance. One sees formality, another sees coldness. One sees structure, another sees distance. And all of them may be describing the same moment. And this is why accounts like Harrold's become controversial in public discussion, because they are not formal judgments, they are personal interpretations of experience inside a highly structured environment, not about one man's behavior. It is about how stories like this even form inside royal institutions. Inside royal households, hierarchy is not optional, it is the foundation of everything. And in such environments, even silence carries meaning. Even absence of greeting can be remembered, even brief interactions can become part of long-term memory. And over time, those memories are retold, reshaped, and passed through interviews, conversations, and media discussions. Until eventually, they become public narrative. Not always identical to what originally happened, but emotionally powerful enough to persist. If you're finding value in this deep documentary breakdown, consider subscribing, because we cover stories like this regularly, where perception, power, and history collide. And so the story of Prince Andrew, as discussed in interviews and recollections, becomes less about one moment and more about layers of perception built over time and layers formed from staff experiences, media coverage, public interpretation, and institutional silence, and in that space between fact and interpretation, narratives grow stronger than individual moments. But what does all of this actually tell us about royal life itself, beyond the headlines? Because in the end, this is not just a story about one member of the royal family. It is a story about perception, about how memory works, about how institutions shape behavior, and about how public identity is formed not only by actions, but by how those actions are remembered and retold. Inside the palace, silence is structure; outside the palace, silence becomes speculation. Inside the palace, hierarchy is order; outside the palace, hierarchy becomes interpretation. And in between those two worlds, stories are born, stories that never fully settle, never fully end, and never fully disappear. And if you enjoy these cinematic documentary-style breakdowns, subscribe now, because there are many more untold stories like this still to explore, and each one goes deeper than the last.